Fred's hands trembled as he gripped his phone, the device almost too small to contain the urgency that coursed through him. Each press of a number felt like a lifeline being thrown across the chasm of his worry. The familiar chime signaled the call connecting, and he heard the voice he had known his entire life on the third ring. "Fred? Hello." His mother's tone carried immediate concern, that innate maternal instinct sensing danger even before words could speak it. "Mom, I need you and Dad to pick up Kai from school at noon," Fred said, his voice taut, each word chosen carefully but carrying a weight heavier than any force he had encountered on the streets. "Take her to my house and stay with her until I get home. Don't mention her anything about Anya. Just keep her safe. Keep her calm." The words rushed from him, clipped, urgent. Yet beneath the surface, a fragile tremor of vulnerability betrayed the depth of his fear. There was a pause, a silence that seemed to stretch across the miles, before his father's voice came through, firm and questioning. "Fred, what's going on? Is Anya okay?" Fred pinched the bridge of his nose and closed his eyes, trying to hold himself together. He had no time for explanations, no energy for comfort. "I can't talk about it right now. I just need you to do this for me." His voice wavered despite his effort to mask it. Gertrude's response was soft, almost reverent in its reassurance. "Of course, sweetheart. We'll be there. Just tell us where to go." The words were a balm, a tether to the normalcy he was frantically trying to maintain for Kai. Fred exhaled a breath he hadn't realized he was holding, the tension in his chest easing slightly. "Kai's school is St. Juliana's, on Parkside Lane. She's in classroom 3B with Mrs. Holloway. Pick her up at noon sharp. Don't let her feel like something's wrong. Just be gentle with her. Keep her distracted. Comfort her as long as you can. We'll take care of her, son," Charles reassured him, and the solid, grounding presence of his father's voice gave Fred the smallest measure of relief. "But you need to tell us what's happening when you can." Fred swallowed hard, the knot in his throat refusing to loosen. "I will, just not now," he whispered, almost to himself, before hanging up. Gertrude's maternal concern lingered in his ears. "Fred, be careful, okay?" she said softly, as if her words alone could shield him from the storm he was about to walk into. "I will," he promised, though he knew it was a lie even as it left his lips. He shoved the phone into his pocket, gripping it for a final moment, as if anchoring himself to the knowledge that at least Kai would be safe. At least one piece of the world he loved would be protected. The fury coursing through his veins still burned, but it now had a vector, a purpose, and he turned to the CTCT monitor, where Anya remained, fragile and broken. Ian watched silently beside him, eyes fixed on the grainy footage, but the image that appeared in his mind was devastatingly clear. Anya was curled on the floor of her cell, arms wrapped around her own shoulders, as though the embrace could keep the world from collapsing around her. Her lips moved faintly, forming whispered words that belonged only to herself, a private litany of hope and fear. Ian knew the weight of guilt, had seen it etched on criminals countless times, but Anya's expression was different. She wasn't guilty, but lost, stranded in a space that did not belong to her. "You," Fred said, low and deliberate, his voice carrying the growl of a predator that had been cornered and refused to retreat. Ian inhaled sharply but remained silent, knowing that words could not bridge the chasm that had opened between them. "You were supposed to have my back," Fred continued, stepping closer, the intensity in his tone sending shivers down the spines of the officers in the room. "You were supposed to protect her, and instead, you threw her in a cage like she was nothing." Ian's gaze flickered back to the monitor, to Anya trembling in that unforgiving cell, and a pit formed in his stomach that left him hollow. "I followed orders, Fred," he muttered, though even as the words left his mouth, he knew they rang hollow, feeble against the magnitude of what had been done. Fred's laugh was sharp, brittle, humorless, each note slicing through the sterile air like a blade. "Orders?" he spat, venom thickening every syllable. "Orders don't justify betrayal. Orders don't justify ripping my family apart." He took another step, the weight of his boots on the floor echoing the fury building inside him. "You put cuffs on the mother of my baby girl, Ian." His jaw clenched so tightly it threatened to crack under the pressure. "Tell me, did you even hesitate?" Ian's throat went dry, his mouth suddenly barren of defense or excuse. No, he had not hesitated. Fred scoffed, shaking his head slowly, his eyes narrowing to slits. "That's what I thought." Ian looked away, unable to sustain the heat of that gaze, but Fred was far from finished. "Don't think for a second that I'll forgive you for this," he whispered, deadly and precise, every word a promise carved into the air. "You took everything from me today." Adjusting his uniform one final time, Fred turned toward the exit, the rhythm of his movements deliberate and controlled, despite the storm that roared inside him. "And I swear to God," he added over his shoulder, voice taut with raw determination, I will never forget it. Then he was gone, leaving Ian alone in the room, fists clenched, eyes fixed on the monitor where Anya sat small, afraid, and irrevocably broken. Fred sat alone in the dimly lit records room, the faint hum of the fluorescent lights above mixing with the low, steady ticking of his own pulse as his fingers drummed restlessly against the polished surface of the desk. The fury that had driven him through the station earlier still lingered in his muscles, a simmering heat beneath his skin, but now his mind was focused with surgical precision. Waiting was not an option. Justice, at least the kind that would protect Anya, could not be left to the whims of bureaucracy or half-hearted investigations. He needed to dig, to unearth the truths that others had either overlooked or deliberately ignored, and he needed to do it before the fragile thread holding Anya's life together could snap. The case files were stacked neatly in front of him, each folder a potential key, each page a door into the labyrinth of events that had led to the chaos consuming Anya's life. Fred began methodically, flipping through witness statements, forensic reports, and surveillance logs with eyes honed by years of observation, reading not just for information, but for nuance, for the spaces between the words where truth often hid. His gaze sharpened, scanning for cracks, for inconsistencies, for anything that could be weaponized against the lies that had ensnared her. It was in the forensic report that he found the first thread, an earring, small, delicate, silver with a single blue gemstone, discovered near the family's private lake, the very place where Ryan Woodberg had drowned. The mention of it sent a jolt through him, a spark that ignited every sense. His pulse quickened as he absorbed the description, his mind racing through every possibility. The earring did not belong to Anya. He knew that with an absolute certainty that transcended doubt. The realization burrowed into him like a living thing, setting his teeth on edge. Someone else had been there. Someone close enough to leave behind an object so personal, so intimate, that its existence at the lake could not be accidental. His hands tightened around the folder as his jaw clenched. Someone had been at that lake the night Ryan died. Someone who had not been Anya, and he would find out who. He turned the pages with deliberate speed, each rustle of paper punctuating the rhythm of his rising determination, until his eyes fell on the transcript of Anya's mother, Dilara Woodberg. The words were simple, yet they resonated with a quiet gravity. Detective, Mrs. Woodberg, do you recognize this earring? Dilara Woodberg, no, I've never seen it before. Fred's brow furrowed. Detective, are you sure? It was found near the lake on your family's property, where your husband had drowned. Dilara Woodberg, I told you, I've never seen it before. It doesn't belong to me, and it certainly doesn't belong to anyone from the property. If someone had it, I would remember. Fred's jaw tightened, the lines of his face hardening with a controlled anger. Dilara was not the type to lie, and if she said she had never seen the earring, he believed her. His eyes moved rapidly across the next pages, seeking confirmation, desperately hoping that someone had followed up on this lead. Instead, a brief note halted his breath. No further investigation conducted on the earring at this time. Fred slammed the file down, the sound echoing in the quiet room. Unbelievable, he muttered, his voice a low rumble. The investigators had allowed it to languish, dismissed it in favor of their narrative that Anya was the culprit. His hands trembled with restrained fury as he gripped the folder tighter, realizing that this negligence was not accidental. It was deliberate, or worse, part of a cover-up. He moved to the next transcript, Elizabeth Livingstone, and his chest tightened at the sight of her name. The tension between Anya and her sister had always been a quiet undercurrent, years of unspoken grievances and buried resentment simmering beneath the surface of polite society. He had seen Elizabeth in passing, during visits to the manor, enough to understand the cold ruthlessness that she carried like a second skin. Her interview confirmed the unease stirring within him. Detective, Mrs. Livingstone, do you recognize this earring? Elizabeth Livingstone, no, it's not mine. Detective, you're certain? Elizabeth Livingstone scoffs. I think I'd remember if I lost a piece of jewelry at a crime scene. Besides, it's not my style. Detective, could it belong to someone in your household? Elizabeth Livingstone, my daughters are young. They don't wear earrings like that. They don't even have their ears pierced yet. So no, it doesn't belong to them. Fred leaned back, worked his chin thoughtfully. There was something in her dismissal, the casual way she scoffed and distanced herself from the implication, that did not sit right. It was the calculated deflection of someone who knew more than she was admitting. A subtle shift of posture, the tiniest tightening of the jaw, all signs of avoidance he had learned to read like a map of hidden truths. Elizabeth had always been untouchable, a woman who had carved a life in high society while Anya struggled in the shadows. And now, this earring had reintroduced her to the scene, quietly, dangerously, at the very place where their father had died. Fred's breath hitched as he moved on to the next transcript, that of James Livingstone. Even his name carried a bitter taste in Fred's mouth. James, whose charm had masked calculation, whose choices had once torn Anya's heart in ways Fred had only begun to comprehend. The interview was polite, measured, controlled. Detective, Mr. Livingstone, do you recognize this earring? James Livingstone, no, never seen it before. Detective, you're certain. It was found at the lake near Ryan Woodberg's drowning site. James Livingstone sighs. Look, I don't know what to tell you. I don't wear earrings, and my wife already told you it's not hers. So, unless my daughters are secretly sneaking out to crime scenes, I have nothing to do with this. Detective, do you know anyone who might own it? James Livingstone, no. Fred's lips pressed into a thin line, the tension radiating from his body like an electric current. James's hesitation, the brief pause before the practiced answer, gnawed at Fred. There was a calmness in his words, a deliberate ease that felt rehearsed, the comfort of someone who believed they'd already escaped scrutiny. But Fred's instincts, honed through years of confronting danger, told him this was a facade. Somehow, someway, James was entwined in the events of that night. As his eyes swept through the papers scattered across the desk, one slipped from the pile, crinkling under the motion, and he snatched it instinctively before it hit the floor. It was a continuation of Elizabeth's interview, and the words he read next stopped his heart mid-beat. Detective, Mrs. Livingstone, has anyone close to the property been to the property recently? Elizabeth Livingstone, no. No one has. Just the usual. Me, my husband, my daughters, my mother, and our live-in staff. No one else. Detective, are you sure? No one who might have a reason to be there? Elizabeth Livingstone, hesitation in her voice. Well, there is one person. Detective, who? Elizabeth Livingstone, her voice lowers, tinged with curiosity. Anya. Fred's pulse skipped a beat, his chest tightening as if gravity itself had shifted. His eyes widened, stomach dropping into a pit that felt bottomless. Yet beneath the shock, a spark of clarity ignited. This was no coincidence. The threads were tangled, yes, but they were beginning to form a pattern. Someone had been at the lake that night. Someone had left a trace, and the investigation had ignored it, leaving Anya exposed to the full weight of suspicion. And Fred, unyielding, relentless, knew with every fiber of his being that he would unravel it all. Fred's chest burned as the words he had just read echoed in his mind, reverberating through him with the force of a physical blow. Elizabeth had said it. She had spoken Anya's name, the name of the one person who had carried the weight of blame for a tragedy she hadn't caused. The revelation slammed into Fred like a brick wall, making his stomach twist and his hands tremble as he realized the scope of what had been set into motion. This was how the detectives had been guided toward Anya. It was not because of any tangible evidence, nor because of motive, nor even because of circumstance. It was because Elizabeth, with a casual drop of a name in the sterile confines of an interrogation room, had planted the seed of suspicion, allowing it to grow unchecked into the accusation that now trapped Anya. Fred's fist collided with the desk, the sharp crack of wood under his knuckles echoing in the quiet records room. Elizabeth had made it appear so innocent, so offhand, as if merely noting Anya's existence were an inconsequential aside. Yet it had been a calculated maneuver. She had guided the investigation, bending it toward her sister without a thought for the consequences, without a pause to consider the ruin it would bring. Rage began to simmer in Fred, a slow, insistent heat that filled him from his stomach to the base of his skull. It was anger at the betrayal itself, at the meticulous way Elizabeth had used her position and influence to manipulate events, but it was tinged with the helplessness that came from knowing he had not been there to prevent it. This was no longer merely a miscarriage of justice. This was deliberate. This was a plan executed with subtle cruelty. He rose abruptly, the paper trembling in his hand as he stormed from the records room, the rhythm of his footsteps thrumming against the concrete floors of the station, like the beat of a war drum. Each step carried the weight of fury and determination, the file, a physical extension of the outrage that coursed through his veins. He could feel the heat of it in his chest, the coiling tension in his muscles, but he did not pause. There was no room for hesitation, no time for reflection. Elizabeth had set a trap, and Anya was caught within it. Every instinct in Fred's body screamed that he had to act immediately. As he rounded the corner into the main hallway, he saw Ian through the glass walls of the conference room, standing between two sharply dressed lawyers. The sight made Fred's pulse spike, and the air in his lungs feel thin, like he was breathing fire. The lawyers were engaged in muted conversation, their voices low and polite, but Fred's gaze was fixed entirely on Ian. The years of shared history between them, The camaraderie forged in life-threatening situations, the trust built over countless cases and near misses, felt like it had been ripped away in an instant. Ian's posture was cautious yet unyielding, his expression carefully controlled. And in that moment, the betrayal Fred had felt earlier crystallized into something darker, a personal affront that demanded confrontation. Fred slowed as he approached, the handle of the conference room door already within reach. The station around them blurred into irrelevance. He saw something flicker in Ian's gaze, a shadow of hesitation, a glimpse of uncertainty, perhaps even guilt. Fred's own eyes narrowed, and the coiled fury within him surged to the surface. Every step and every heartbeat were declarations of the storm he carried. He had trusted Ian, relied on him, and yet here he was, speaking with lawyers, as though Anya's suffering were merely a procedural inconvenience. With no further thought, Fred threw open the door, the sudden movement drawing sharp attention from the lawyers, who froze mid-sentence, their polite conversations evaporating into stunned silence. Ian, however, did not flinch. He held Fred's gaze with a steadiness that both infuriated and fascinated him, a subtle acknowledgement that the confrontation was inevitable. Fred's voice cut through the room, low and honed to a razor edge. "Talk to me, Ian." The words were more than a request. They were a challenge, a demand for accountability that could not be ignored. The lawyers exchanged uneasy glances, their discomfort palpable, yet Fred ignored them completely. Ian's voice finally emerged, measured yet guarded. "This isn't the time, Fred." Fred's eyes blazed with uncontainable fury as he stepped closer, every muscle taut with the need for answers. "Don't tell me when the time is," he snapped, the words sharp, resonant, and impossible to ignore. "I need to know news, now." Ian's jaw tightened, his eyes narrowing, meeting Fred's unflinching glare with a controlled firmness. But the tension between them only thickened, suffocating presence in the room. "It's complicated." Fred's chest rose and fell with rapid, deliberate breaths, his body vibrating with restrained violence as he took another step forward. "I'll tell you what's complicated, Ian," he said, his voice low, steady, and loaded with venom. "What's complicated is that I trusted you. I thought you were my friend. But now I see you for what you really are." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle, pressing against Ian like the heavy walls of the station itself. Ian's lips parted, as if to respond, but no words came. Fred's gaze did not waver. "You sold her out, and you sold me out, and I'll make sure everyone knows what kind of person you really are." The silence stretched, thick and oppressive, until Ian finally spoke, his voice quiet, almost defeated. "You don't know everything, Fred. You don't know why this is happening." Fred shook his head, a bitter laugh of disbelief cutting through the tension in the room. "I don't need to know anything more. I need to talk to you, Ian, now." The lawyers flinched, uncertain, their polite detachment fractured by the intensity radiating from Fred. But he did not spare them a second of attention. His focus was singular, fixed entirely on Ian, who stood frozen, a mixture of surprise, caution, and the faintest glimmer of apprehension playing across his features, as if he too sensed the storm that had been unleashed. Fred stepped forward, his tall frame filling the conference room with a quiet, simmering force that made the air feel heavy and taut. His eyes, burning with the intensity of a man whose patience had been shattered, locked onto Ian with unwavering focus. "You let her sit behind those rusty bars and waste away without even asking the most basic question," he said, his voice low but loaded with a searing edge. "No interview, no DNA samples, no nothing. You just arrested her because her sister mentioned her name." Each word struck the room like a hammer, reverberating off the walls and into the ears of everyone present. The lawyers flinched, their hands clasped tightly together, acutely aware that the conversation unfolding was a storm they had no power to stop. Ian's expression stiffened, a flicker of guilt and frustration passing across his features, yet he remained rooted in place, unwilling to yield to the force of Fred's anger. Fred's fist clenched at his sides, veins standing out along his forearms, his body taut with suppressed fury that threatened to boil over. "Is that really how you work now, Ian?" he demanded, taking another deliberate step closer, his presence an oppressive weight. "You take someone's name, and suddenly they're guilty? That's your evidence? You don't even have anything concrete tying her to Ryan Woodberg's death, do you? No fingerprints, no forensics, no witnesses, just a name." The words were bitter, corrosive, laced with disbelief, and the room seemed to shrink under the intensity of his gaze. Ian's jaw flexed as he took a hesitant step forward, but Fred did not pause. His voice rose, shaking with a mixture of rage and raw anguish. "Tell me, Ian, what the hell kind of police work is that? How many people are rotting in cells because of assumptions, lazy shortcuts, and hearsay? Just because her sister thought she might have been involved, you threw her life away?" His chest heaved, each breath coming sharp and ragged, the crescendo of his fury echoing through the small space. The lawyers remained silent, the weight of the confrontation pressing on them like a storm about to break. Ian stood motionless, his eyes betraying a flicker of hesitation, but he did not avert his gaze. The silence stretched, thick and oppressive, until Ian's voice emerged, quiet but deliberate. "You're right, Fred. There's no direct evidence, but you're also wrong about one thing." Fred blinked, a spark of surprise flickering in the storm of his rage. "What the hell are you talking about?" he asked, his voice taut with incredulity. Ian's gaze held his, cold and unyielding, as he responded with measured control. "The investigation isn't over. We're still gathering information, but it's a start." Fred shook his head, disbelief mixing with fury. "A start? That's what you call this? Arresting her without a shred of proof?" His words were like knives, carving the room into fragments of tension and regret. Ian's expression hardened, the layers of his carefully maintained composure becoming visible as he met Fred's furious stare. "I'm not the one who decided she was guilty, Fred. I'm just following orders. The case is complicated. You should know that better than anyone." Fred's heart sank in the moment, struck by the sheer weight of complacency masquerading as duty. "You've lost your spine, Ian. This isn't about orders. This is about what's right, what's just." Ian's lips pressed into a firm line. "I don't need a lecture, Fred. I'm trying to solve this case with what I have." Fred felt a visceral lurch in his stomach, the helpless anger coiling tighter. "And what about her?" he demanded, voice rising and cracking with the depth of his outrage. "What about Anya? You think she doesn't deserve justice?" Ian remained silent, his eyes dark, refusing to meet the full force of Fred's intensity. Fred's mind raced, and then it hit him, a sudden clarity slicing through the chaos of his fury. He remembered a crucial detail, one he had nearly overlooked in his heat, and it made his chest tighten and his pulse race. Anya had not been interviewed, not once. The arrest had been built on a name casually dropped in an interrogation, on conjecture, on a flimsy suggestion passed as fact. He pivoted sharply, letting the weight of this realization drive him forward with renewed purpose, and strode back to Ian with measured fury. The lawyers watched with restrained apprehension as Fred approached, the tension in the air almost tangible. Ian's stance remained rigid, but Fred's gaze bore into him like steel, unyielding and merciless. "You know, Ian," Fred said, his voice low but cutting. "There's one detail you've been ignoring." Ian raised an eyebrow, wary yet attentive, and Fred leaned closer, his presence both commanding and relentless. "Anya hadn't seen her father or her family for 7 years. 7. Did you know that?" The words landed with the force of a revelation, and for the first time, the carefully constructed barrier in Ian's expression faltered. Fred's tone softened just enough to draw attention, carrying with it the weight of truth and experience, his words deliberate and almost intimate. "I was with her. I drove her to that manor the first time after her father passed. I saw her face as she reunited with her family, the first time in 7 years. You have no idea what she's been through, no idea what she's endured." The pause that followed was thick with unspoken understanding, the air charged with the gravity of shared history and betrayal. Ian's eyes darkened, comprehension slowly dawning, but Fred did not yield. "If you had bothered, Ian, you would know she wasn't anywhere near that lake. She wasn't involved. But you never thought to ask. You never considered it." Ian's lips parted in hesitation, but Fred cut him off, his voice sharp and final, leaving no room for justification or deflection. "No. You don't get to make excuses. You made a mistake, a big one. You took her from her daughter, from her bookstore, from her life, for nothing. You can't pretend this was anything other than a grave error." The room seemed to hold its breath, the lawyers watching silently, as the tension settled like dust after a storm. Ian's eyes fell, his shoulders slumping, the weight of Fred's words sinking into him like a tide. Finally, his gaze lifted, softer now, tempered with reluctant acceptance. "You're right," he admitted quietly. I didn't consider all of it." Fred's stance did not relax. He remained a vigilant sentinel of justice, his anger contained but unyielding, a reminder of the price of oversight. Ian exhaled, a long, measured breath, the truth finally settling into place. "This was handled all wrong. I shouldn't have made assumptions without facts." Fred's eyes never left him, unwavering, cold and resolute. "It's not too late to fix it. You're going to take the right steps, or I'll drag you through the mud with me. Elizabeth has been meddling in Anya's life ever since she found out their late father left her house and a part of Woodburg's fortune. She won't stop, and neither will I." The older lawyer stepped forward, her voice firm and unwavering, breaking the tension with authority. "We'll take Anya's case," she said, her tone precise and confident. With this new information, we can build a proper defense. It won't be easy, but we can pursue every lead. The case is more complicated than we were told, but we have a path forward. Fred's shoulders relaxed slightly, a fleeting relief washing through him. Anya would have the lawyer she deserved, the protection she had been denied. He turned toward the exit, his pulse beginning to steady, but his mind still aflame with resolve. "I'll be keeping an eye on you, Eon," he warned, his voice cold and deliberate, carrying the weight of a promise he intended to keep. "I'm not going to let anyone play with Anya's life, not you nor anyone else." Eon remained silent,